I just started.
You started, okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and start from the beginning.
Okay.
And we'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha.
To the founder,
The endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
short mandala offering, once in English. This ground
Anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I
Go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodam Soki Chotnam La Chachu Bardu Takni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sonamgi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparsho Sangye Chodam Soki Chotnam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sanam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, let's go ahead and do just a very short meditation. Just spend a minute or two focusing on the breath, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's teaching. So we'll begin now. Now, to set our motivation for tonight, is recalling a teaching that Lama Yeshe gave in 1983 before he passed away. And I remember when I first read this teaching, I was really touched by his words. And he essentially is saying that one of the most painful things about our lives is that we can't help others to the extent that we would like to. And if we look at the world that we live in, there's so much suffering. Now that we have the awareness of things going on in so many parts of the world, it's really tempting to close our eyes to the suffering of the world. And we feel that sense of helplessness that Lama Yeshe was speaking to. We cannot help others to the extent that we would like to, as much as we would love to be able to wipe away all the suffering in Gaza, in the Ukraine, in so many other parts of the world. We can't do this. We feel a bit helpless. And of course, Lama Yeshe went on to say that bodhicitta is the answer to that dilemma. When we feel helpless, we recognize that there is something we actually can do, and that is to generate this very far-reaching and all-encompassing motivation. This is the response to the suffering of the world, the sincere wish to benefit all beings to the greatest degree by developing our own potential. And although we can do some things here and there to alleviate suffering in the moment, this is really the best answer to the suffering of the world as well. Because if we are able to develop ourselves to that degree, then we can help others perfectly. We can help them to discover the nature of reality, to cultivate all the qualities that are necessary to develop their own minds, to remove everything that currently afflicts them and obscures their minds. We can't do that in our current state. It will require us developing ourselves into the state of a Buddha. So as you cultivate this mind of bodhicitta tonight, think that this is the answer to the suffering of the world. The precious gift of bodhicitta that the Buddha gave us that will be the means by which all sentient beings will be able to be free from all suffering and find the greatest bliss and happiness possible. We can open our eyes slowly and begin the class. So, great. So we are working in this section where we dealt with the advice for the householders. I think we finished that section. And we're going on now, I think in the last class, we started that section that pertains to both the householders as well as those who've abandoned the householder life, the monastics and what have you. So we're in the very first section of this. It's divided into 3 sections, this chapter. The first one is the practice of the Dharma that is common to both goals. Remember, we have 2 goals that the Buddha set out. The goal of what we call high status or good rebirth, and then the goal of again, definite goodness is one term that's used, I think, in our text. It's called supreme beatitude or something like that, a really strange term. But anyway, these are the more ultimate goals that we can attain of liberation and enlightenment. And so there's the very first topic of the Dharma that's common to both goals. We looked at kind of the preliminary points among these 6 points, the regulating the quantity of your food as well as your sleep, these things being necessary for us to engage in more wholehearted practice. We're now on the section just before verse 40, the third of these 6 sections, which is meditating upon the 4 immeasurables. So I think most of you are familiar with the 4 immeasurables. We use them in almost every sadhana or practice. They are the cultivation of these 4 thoughts. And these 4 thoughts are actually practiced, not just in the Mahayana tradition, where they're often used to they use this term, moisten the mind before developing bodhicitta. They give us kind of a lot of juice behind our bodhicitta. But we use them, they use them in the Theravadan tradition, all the other traditions, as a way of opening their hearts to others. And so let's go and look at this section in Venerable Randhawa's text. I'll get that up on the screen and we can resume. Oh, now I've got that up too high. Let me see right here. Okay, good. Now it's up too high again. So meditating on the four immeasurables. So there's a little introductory section here that says, whoops, what did it do? Okay. When versatility, karmanya of body and mind, again, I'm not going to read any of these Sanskrit words because they just get a little too complicated sometimes. When versatility of body and mind has been developed through these practices, meaning again, through regulating our food and our sleep, one should then practice meditation upon the four immeasurables as further preparation for the attainment of the composed states, or these states of concentration that are called the jhana or jhanas. These are the next topic, which we're going to go into after this third one on the four immeasurables. So we have verse 40. Practice constant meditation upon loving kindness, compassion, joyfulness, equanimity. Even though you may not attain the highest goal, you will acquire the bliss of the Brahma realm. It said that the practice of these four, as we'll see, will allow you to attain a rebirth in one of the Brahma realms through eventually attaining the concentrations that allow you to do that as well. But they are said to be, again, the main means of developing so many of our qualities. Now, this is the order that they're set out in, often in the Theravadan tradition, as well as in sometimes in the presentations in Tibetan Buddhism, you see them in this order. Love, immeasurable love or loving kindness, then immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and then immeasurable equanimity. But it said in the practice of developing bodhicitta, it's good to put equanimity first, and then the other three in the same order after equanimity. So let's read what Venerable Randhawa says. Loving kindness is the desire that all sentient beings should come to acquire happiness. This is that basic thought of wanting beings to be happy, to have the causes of happiness. Compassion is the desire that they should come to be freed from suffering, and of course, the causes of suffering. So these are the two main ones that, again, we feed into our bodhicitta in particular, the wish that beings have happiness, the wish that they be free from suffering. And they become great love and great compassion when we combine them with an altruistic intention that we actually be the ones responsible for helping others in that way. Joyfulness is the gladness felt at the happiness they have acquired. And the measurable joy is very akin to what we call rejoicing in our tradition, developing a joyful attitude, thinking about the good fortune of others, the things that they have attained, the freedom from suffering that they have attained, and so on. Then finally, equanimity is an even-mindedness consisting of absence of either desire or hatred, also directed towards all beings. So we use equanimity as well in the Mahayana path as the basis for developing bodhicitta. Currently we do have a bias towards beings that influences our thinking about them and our attitudes towards them. The people who are friends, who are dear ones, we have a strong attachment towards. The people who are strangers, we have a mind of indifference towards, not really caring so much about their situation. And then towards the difficult people, the challenging ones in our lives, we have usually some sense of aversion, anger, maybe even hatred towards some of them. So those attitudes become an obstacle to us opening our hearts to all the other beings. And that's why when we practice these in the Mahayana, we use that as our foundational practice. If we develop this even-mindedness, this equal regard for all beings, then they can easily become the object of our love, our compassion, even our joy, and taking delight in their situation. But if we don't have that equanimity from the beginning, it's very hard, right? Because we are only used to having thoughts of love and compassion towards those people that we're already close to. Occasionally the strangers break through, right? We'll see something like that horrible incident that happened in Gaza this week with the 7 aid workers who were from World Central Kitchen who were killed. And you see that I saw their photos in The Guardian, today or yesterday, I can't remember. And it just made me cry to see their faces, these beautiful, wonderful human beings who were doing this compassionate work. So there are times when strangers break through to us, and we might be able to feel some sense of compassion and love for them. But often we're blocked to strangers, and we're certainly blocked to the difficult people. Whoever it is that you put in that category, when they appear on the news or when they're in your life, showing up wherever you're going, just watch your mind and see what comes up. Do thoughts of loving kindness and compassion come up more easily, or do we tend to be, again, having a lot of aversion towards them? So this is the problem. Again, equanimity is often practiced first because we need to kind of make it everyone on an equal basis. Then we can more easily generate these other thoughts. Nonetheless, there is some merit, I suppose, to practicing them in the order that they're presented here. But as I said, all the Buddhist traditions practice these, but in the Mahayana, we use them quite specifically as the means to be able to cultivate bodhicitta. And let me just get the next paragraph up here. These four attitudes are called immeasurable, both because their object is an immeasurable number of sentient beings, right? Because that's the field that we are cultivating these thoughts on, is immeasurable beings. And because the person who meditates upon them acquires immeasurable merit. One is thus advised to meditate in a right manner upon the four immeasurables. They are often done in conjunction with doing deeper practice of developing calm abiding, the concentrations, all of that, because they're kind of a nice complement to it. They help us to purify some of our negative attitudes towards others, as well as develop more positive regard for all beings. This meditation can further be of three types, depending upon the manner in which one directs the mind's attention. It can have sentient beings in a very kind of like mere sentient beings without being qualified, except by the fact that they are, in their situation of wanting happiness, wanting to not suffer, and so on. That's the first one. It can have dharmas or phenomena as its object, and it can be without an object. By that we mean without an kind of an object being there inherently, as we would normally look upon sentient beings with that kind of ignorance operating. So in the first of these, which is what we normally talk about, right? Beings are simply being apprehended as being substantially real and existing independently of the aggregates. We don't go through any analysis of these beings. We just accept them in the way that they appear. Accordingly, one develops the desire that they be freed from suffering, that they have happiness, and so on, all the things that we normally would do. Then it says, and I'm going to talk a little bit about emptiness in this section, with the realization of the no self nature of the individual, meaning the lack of a self of a person rather than of phenomena, beings in the second case are viewed as entities merely ascribed to the dharmas, to the phenomena that comprise it's called here the heaps, it's the aggregates. So essentially, what we're talking about here in the second category, at least in the way also that Geshe Sopa explains this in his commentary, is that where there is an ability certainly to initially realize the emptiness of the self, of the person, as opposed to the emptiness of all phenomena. Recall that in the middle way school that we're always, that's our touch point for the view of emptiness that we need to realize eventually. That middle way point of view, those tenets teach that all phenomena lack any inherent existence. Persons, chairs, tables, computers, dogs, whatever. I mean, all beings lack any inherent existence as well as all phenomena. But initially we realize it in regard to the person, because this is where we kind of are revolving around this strong sense of there being a real me here, and my tendency to kind of reify that sense of an I, and then try to seek what that I needs as a way of satisfying that I, to be free of the things that cause it pain, to gravitate towards the things that bring it pleasure. This is the big mistake that we're all making, is primarily around this sense of an I. And that's where usually our realization of emptiness begins. And the Buddha even did teach that there are some other coarser views of selflessness that we have with regard to this I. One of them is more innate as well, like this sense of an inherently existent I. It's called a substantially existent, self-sufficient I. It's the idea that there's kind of someone in charge over this collection of stuff, like a boss that is there over the department that includes our aggregates and what have you. That's also a misconception that we have to realize is incorrect along the way. And then there's even a coarser one where we realize that we might, according to false tenets, we might think that there's something that is completely independent of the body and the mind, that is like a soul or Atman, as it was taught in the Vedic traditions, that is the real I, that is kind of this sense of an I that goes on from life to life and what have you. And that, of course, also doesn't exist according to the Buddha. So there are coarser forms of selflessness in relation to the I that are taught. But eventually we get to the place where we realize that the I has no inherent existence, meaning that when we look at this collection of stuff, this phenomena that we call the heaps or the aggregates, we don't find anything that is the real I among those. There's no real I here. Again, we talked about this a little when we touched on emptiness, that the I is merely imputed, merely designated to this collection of stuff. There's nothing more than that that is the I. The I is a label, a thought, a designation. Requires a basis, the phenomena, but it's still, again, very, very subtle in the way that it exists. So again, this is the second one that's called here, I think at the previous page it said that it was called sentient beings or having the meditation having dharmas as its object. It says dharmas, but it means kind of the phenomena that are the basis for the I. And we're looking upon those and realizing that there's no inherently existent I there with regard to the person, the self. But of course, we can also analyze those aggregates and analyze all phenomena and come to the same conclusion. So that's where we get to the third level. And let me put this on the screen. And sometimes there's a different explanation of these three in regard to compassion, and I won't go into that tonight. But let's just present, the way that Geshe Sopa says and the way that our commentary says. So, okay, so this is the second one, as it said there, when we realize there's no self-nature for the individual, the I, the person, then beings in the second case are viewed as entities that are merely ascribed to the dharmas which comprise the heaps, merely imputed, merely designated to the five aggregates. Again, the five aggregates are the form aggregate and then the four that are mental. Feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousness. I won't go into a huge explanation of all that. And then it says, the third line there, one then develops the desire that they be freed from suffering, that they find happiness, and all the same thoughts that we were talking about, right? So the change is in how we're looking at those sentient beings. The first one, we're just looking at them, not really even thinking about their ultimate nature. The second one, we're seeing them through the lens of lacking this self of persons, this inherently existent I. In the third case, it says there, beings are viewed as illusory in nature through the realization of the no self nature of dharmas, of phenomena. That's again beyond persons. Persons are included in phenomena usually, right? But we're talking about things that are not persons. We're talking about chairs and tables and computers and everything that is not a being. So it says here, you then develop the desire that they be freed from suffering and so on. Because we see that even their aggregates are qualified in that way, their bodies, their minds, all of these things that are not sentient beings are also lacking any inherent nature. So the first meditation is the one practiced by common persons. That's where we normally practice compassion, love, and so on. According to one school of Buddhist thought, the second type is practiced by the Shravaka and Pratyeka Aryas, and the third by Mahayana Aryas alone. Whereas another school, which is actually our school, the Consequence Middle Way School, holds that the Shravakas and Pratyekas, again, these are the practitioners of the Hinayana path, also attained realization of the no-self nature of dharmas, and that both the latter two types of meditation are therefore practiced by all the Aryas of the three vehicles. So again, I don't want to get into a deeper explanation of that, but just know that we can bring a kind of wisdom component to our practice of the immeasurables. When we are observing sentient beings and wanting them to be free from suffering, we start with just seeing them not conditioned or qualified by this ultimate reality. We just see them through the lens of this is, their conventional situation. They are suffering. They are under the control of their karma and delusions. They are going from life to life, experiencing the varieties of suffering. The second one, we realize that the beings who we are observing going through all of this lack any inherent existence. That selflessness of persons we're kind of focusing on. And the third one, we're recognizing that they are in a world where everything is lacking any inherent existence. Their aggregates, the things that they have as objects of use, whatever, everything, not just the person, has that same kind of final nature, that ultimate nature that is the emptiness of inherent existence. So in this way, like I said, you can bring some wisdom into your meditation on these qualities that are actually more in the method side of the path, right? Compassion, love, what have you. But we bring in the wisdom component. In the sutra path, this is how we practice the union of these two wings of compassion and wisdom, is that we try to qualify what we're observing through the lens of both of those as much as possible, recognizing that they are two different aspects. One is conventional nature, the other is their ultimate truth, their emptiness. But we kind of work with it at that level. So that's the idea behind this. I don't want to spend too much time on it because, again, it's not as it's an irrelevant point certainly, but it's not maybe as important as getting the four immeasurables themselves and really understanding what we're doing there. So concerning the actual method of practice, in developing the first three attitudes, which again in this presentation were love or loving kindness, compassion, and joyfulness or joy, one distinguishes three types of persons: a friend, a neutral person, and an enemy. First, one directs the attention towards such individuals as one's mother or father, who constitute the category of friends, and meditates upon the desire that they meet with happiness and so on. So for those three, it's kind of easiest to start with those who are very close to you, right? Because we already have some love and compassion, and we do take delight when they're happy, right? Then the attention is directed towards individuals of the neutral category because they're the next easiest to work with. And finally, towards an enemy because they're the hardest to work with, right? We just don't have these thoughts naturally towards people who we don't like, who have harmed us or disagree with us or hold political views different than us, whatever. So when the desires that one's friends meet with happiness and that one's enemies meet with happiness are of equal intensity, the meditation is complete. And of course, the same for compassion, when the desire that one's friends be free of suffering and that one's enemies be free of suffering are of equal intensity, then the meditation is complete. That's a pretty tall order, right? To get to a place where we have the same level of intensity with regard to someone who's very dear to us and someone who we despise. Those are the first three. In the case of equanimity, though, one first meditates upon the category of neutral persons. Again, this is, I've not always heard it this way, but it does make some sense because with neutral persons, we don't have a strong emotion around them, right? The whole point of equanimity, it is to get rid of the indifference that we have towards them, which is an obstacle, right? Because we do have to eventually care about their welfare and their well-being. But the main kind of poisons are coming up with regard to the friends who we're quite attached to. We, do take care of them because they take care of us. And the enemies, we want nothing to do with them because they've harmed us or they're in a disagreement with us. So the idea is that those two have much stronger emotions that we need to reduce. So this is the order that we're talking about here, starting off with the neutrals, as Pema Chodron calls them, strangers, people who don't register something strongly for us one way or another. Then one subsequently meditates upon an attitude of equanimity towards all, both those dear to one and those towards whom one feels animosity. And you may have to go through them on a more individual basis with regard to each of those categories, because I think it's hard to just open up and feel them towards all beings, regardless of what role they've played. But maybe you have already equalized to some degree if you've done the meditations in this order, because you've already generated thoughts of loving kindness and compassion towards these beings, if you generated them in the order that's presented again. But nonetheless, these are hard minds to work with, developing them to this degree. But we just do it, as best as we can, and eventually they can become very, very powerful. In answer to the question of what the fruits of this practice are, The outcome of meditation upon loving kindness and so on, sustained by the wisdom apprehending the two types of no self nature, is the attainment of nirvana. Because that's how they're primarily used on our path, is that we moisten the mind with that, and we eventually, if we unite it with the wisdom realizing emptiness, we will eventually attain nirvana, or even Buddhahood for that matter. Yet, even if one does not acquire this highest goal, one will acquire a happiness which lies beyond the sensory realm. That is, the happiness of the Brahma realm, set in the first jhana of the form realm. The reason for this is that the above meditations will bring one an experience of the peace of flawless jhana, free from the torment of anger. See, because when we're pacifying our mind with regard to these four measurables, they actually create a conducive mind for us to be able to acquire the karma to be reborn in those realms through practicing these four jhanas or dhyanas, these four concentrations, which we're going to go into next. That's the very next topic. So then it says, hence, the text here indicates that loving kindness and so forth are preparatory exercises leading to the attainment of these jhana states, these concentration states. Maybe I'll refer to them from here on out as the four concentrations. I might show you a little chart here that indicates kind of what these realms are all about. We have, in terms of the realms of samsara, we usually are kind of focused a lot on the desire realm, which is at the bottom of that chart, right? The six realms, which are the gods, the demigods, the humans, those are the three favorable existences, the animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings, those are the unfortunate states. But if you develop these deeper states of concentration, which have as their prerequisite attaining calm abiding, which is already a pretty major accomplishment, we will have some talk about calm abiding a little later. But the idea is that when we attain a deeper level of concentration, the first, second, third, and fourth, you can go on and cultivate more and more subtler states of mind, eventually going on then to the formless absorptions, as they're often called. But these are, again, states of meditative stabilization that are profound in what they do, and they do suppress to some degree the delusions from appearing in our minds. But in and of themselves, they aren't a doorway through which we go into liberation. They actually, it said that when Prince Siddhartha, when the Buddha was the young prince and he went off on his spiritual quest, he practiced with these great meditation masters of the Vedic traditions who taught him these techniques for refining his consciousness to these amazing levels. But you get to the one point, I'll show it on the chart again in a minute. It's called the peak of cyclic existence. It's like the subtlest that your mind can get in terms of meditative stabilization. And there's nothing beyond that. And you end up kind of at a dead end. You sort of hit the ceiling and you cannot go any further. So these are wonderful states for us to practice with and to develop a really fine tuning our meditative stabilization. But they don't in and of themselves lead to liberation unless we use them in conjunction with the meditations on emptiness and realizing emptiness together with these very stable states of mind. So they nonetheless do create what we often call unmoving or unfluctuating karma, meaning that if you develop the first concentration, let me put that chart back on then you are creating essentially the ability to be reborn in the first level of the form realm, and it has three sub-levels as well. So the first concentration creates an unmoving karma that will cause rebirth in an actual physical existence where you'll have this meditative state and a very refined mind and not experience much suffering. But again, it's just karmically induced. And at the end of that life, you would go on to another existence. The second concentration creates its own unmoving karma for the second realm of the form realm. I didn't list the realms on this chart, but essentially we have a realm of existence that lines up with each of these four concentrations, as well as with the four formless absorptions. And of course, they're not realms at that point, really, because it's just you don't have any form. So when you have that unmoving karma that causes you to be reborn in those, you just kind of wherever you're at, the consciousness immediately goes into that state and abides there till the karma is exhausted. And then again, you would take rebirth somewhere else. So the way that this technique is done of developing these, and I'll just go through it very briefly because we're going to talk a little bit about these realms and the four concentrations, how you develop them in a moment, is that when you develop the first concentration, as I said, the prerequisite for this is having the mind of calm abiding. But you're essentially looking at the desire realm, and you're seeing the desire realm as being very coarse and actually being in a state of much greater suffering, compared to the form realm. So you develop this in a mundane way. There is a way to do it that it's super mundane, where you're using the Four Noble Truths and so on, but I'm not going to talk about that tonight. The more common way that these are developed is that you actually are looking at the faults of the layer, the kind of whatever is just immediately below it, and then seeing the advantages of what you're trying to develop. So as you move in this process of developing each of these concentrations, you go through the next part of this chart, these 7 preparations. I'm not going to go into these tonight. Don't get scared by all these words on the screen. But essentially, you go through these 7 steps and you separate in a temporary way from the afflictions related to the realm below you. So again, to develop the first concentration, you're looking at the coarseness of the desire realm. And over those 7 preparations, you eventually develop the first concentration. Then you go on to develop the second concentration by looking at the faults of the first concentration, because it does have faults compared to a subtler state of mind. Each of these is much subtler than the one that preceded it. Okay, and then you do the same thing for the third. To develop it, you look at the faults of the second. To develop the fourth, you look at the faults of the third. To develop the limitless space, you look at the faults of the fourth and the advantages of limitless space. And then the infinite consciousness is more advantageous than limitless space, nothingness more advantageous than infinite consciousness. And then you get to peak of psychic existence, which is sometimes called without discrimination, but not without subtle discrimination. It's a very, very subtle state of mind. But as I said, it's called the peak of psychic existence because once you develop that state of mind by seeing the coarseness of the realm of nothingness or the mind of nothingness, there's nowhere to go to. There's not a subtler state of mind beyond that. That's the peak of samsara. That's where you hit the ceiling. And you can't go beyond that using this mundane method, this worldly method. So essentially, these are very profound states of mind to attain. And many people, in the Vedic traditions, there is a strong confidence that these do lead to some form of moksha, liberation. But nonetheless, in the Buddhist perspective, unless you're uniting them with meditation on selflessness, emptiness, what have you, bringing that into your state of mind, you don't really have everything needed. You only have the deeper level of concentration, but no real object that will remove the afflictions. As I said, they just get kind of suppressed. You suppress them by going layer by layer. And eventually you get to this very, very subtle state of mind, but you haven't attained anything that profound. In fact, all the teachers I've had say that we've had these very subtle states of mind countless times in other lifetimes. We've developed them and we never did anything more with them than experience the bliss of them. They are very blissful states generally. Yes, Mary Jo.
Are those what is called jhanas?
Yeah, jhanas. These first 4 are usually called the jhanas. The other ones, I don't know if they have a term in Sanskrit, they must, but the other 4 we often call the formless absorptions. So these 4 are creating karma to be reborn without any gross form at all. And so you get these very, very subtle states of mind. And then when you sort of check out of your life, die from that existence where you develop these, you might be reborn in that formless existence where you don't have any physical form. You're just kind of you created this sort of surplus of that meditative energy that carries you through until it's exhausted. And then you fall from that again, because all of these are just temporary states. Let's take a look at Nagarjuna's text and the commentary, and it might flesh this out a little bit more. Granting that meditation upon loving kindness and so forth enables one to attain the 4 jhanas or jhanas, a person might well ask what sort of results follow from that. So these 4 concentrations, total abandonment of sensory experience, joy, ease, and discomfort, enable one to attain the same fortune as Brahma, Abhasvara, Subha Kritsna, and Vratpala. These are beings who exist in these various realms of the four. And again, I mentioned that each of them has three that are karmic results. They also have beings who abide in those various realms. So let's look at what is said by Venerable Rendao. It's a little more detailed. The first jhana is one-pointedness of mind, characterized by the joy and ease arising through the eschewal of and withdrawal from sensory experience, particularly the desire for sense objects, as well as malice. That's again speaking to what when we're looking at the faults of the desire realm. The faults of the desire realm is that we're plagued by desire, by attachment, as well as malice. Those are removed and you experience a sense of joy and ease. This is accomplished by means of the two antidotes of reflection. Reflection, we usually call it investigation, and deliberation or analysis. This is kind of the analysis that you go through by seeing the faults of the desire realm and looking at the advantages of the first concentration, the first jhana. The second jhana, by the way, that handout that I had showed all of you. Some of you got this when we did Exploring Meditation in the Exploring Buddhism course. There is a little chart that I put together then where each of the branches of these concentrations are set out in terms of we have investigation and analysis, the joy and ease or happiness, and then of course they all are a form of meditative stabilization. But I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but this is what Venerable Rendao is sharing with us, is the antidote and benefit branch of each of these levels of concentration or meditative stabilization. So that second concentration or jhana is one-pointedness of mind. Again, that's this meditative stabilization characterized by the joy and ease or happiness arising from samadhi, and the eschewal of the above-mentioned deliberation. So there's no analysis any longer at this level. The latter is accomplished through the antidote referred to as inner clarity. Again, the mind gets subtler at this stage. The third concentration or jhana is one-pointedness of mind. It's the same, similar meditative stabilization, characterized by ease or happiness and the eschewal of joy. We actually don't have joy because joy can be more disturbing to our minds the further up we go in developing these deeper concentrations. And that latter is being accomplished through the antidotes of recollection, mindfulness, vigilance or introspection, and equanimity. And equanimity here is referring to the ability for the mind to be in that balanced state. I'm pretty sure that's what is being talked about here. Let's see if on my chart I have similar things for this. Mindfulness, introspection, equanimity, and then again, happiness that is isolated or withdrawn from joy. And then, of course, meditative stabilization. These are called branches. Again, they just mean that what are the aspects of those meditative states? This one has 5 branches, 4 branches, 5 and 4 for the last one. So in the last one, we're going to see that it has pure mindfulness and equanimity and the feeling of equanimity. It's kind of interesting. They say the feeling of equanimity almost becomes more a better state of mind for us as we go deeper into our concentration, rather than happiness or joy that again can be very destabilizing for our mind. So let's go to the fourth one. The fourth, here we go. The fourth jhana is one-pointedness of mind characterized by the sensation of equanimity. That's the feeling that we have. Again, it's not happiness and it's certainly not any sort of suffering, but it's this feeling of equanimity, kind of a neutral feeling. And the total eschewal of both ease and discomfort, right? So we kind of get rid of any of that conflicting things in our minds and just experience a sort of neutral state of well-being. This eschewal is brought about through the antidotes of pure recollection and again, pure equanimity. It's ability for the mind to rest in this balanced state through pure mindfulness. Again, I could spend a whole weekend going through this and go through all the texts that explain all the ins and outs of how you go through various preparations and what those preparations do. But this is, again, beyond what we really need to know for this course. I think it's mainly just to understand that these are states of concentration that ideally we should look to develop. Of course, we have to initially get calm abiding, which is already a pretty major accomplishment. And then we can develop these deeper states. So the verse states that by meditating upon these four concentrations, also referred to as the causal states of composure, one attains the same birth as, respectively, the deities of Mahabrahma, which would be the beings of the first concentration realm, Abhasvara, which is the second concentration realm, Subhakrishna, and that would be the third, and Vrajapala, the fourth. So again, those are actual realms of existence where when you create the karma through developing that meditation, at the end of that life, you could be reborn in that form realm state.
In what state?
It's in the form realm. I didn't put this on the chart, but when we go back to these concentrations, this very first chart, there is a realm of existence that corresponds to each of these four. So I just put formless realm and form realm, but there would be a realm that we call the peak of psychic existence, which is a formless realm where beings who are abiding in that state, having left behind the life where they developed that, now are experiencing that unfluctuating karma. There are, within the form realm, again, there are three individual ones related to these as ripening of that karma. But essentially you have different realms that are a product of that. So we talk about the first concentration form realm. That would be the level where beings who created that first concentration mind in that life created the karma to be reborn there. So that over on the left side, that's ideally, if I put this together with all of that, let me see if I can pull that up. I think I had another chart like this when we were talking about this previously, not this topic, but the realms of samsara. Let's see, letter to a friend here. Chart on the realms of samsara. Let me put that up there. And that will actually give us a little bit better view of what we're doing here. All right. Okay, I can't get them all on one page unless I reduce the size a little bit. I'm going to have to share this in a moment. You waiting at home, hang on, I'll come right back to it. Okay, so this was a chart I shared some time ago when we were talking about the various realms of beings. It doesn't, again, fit completely on the screen here, but we essentially have the formless realm at the top there. There are four realms within that, based on, again, what level of formless absorption you develop. And then we have here the pure lands that are included in the fourth concentration, but they don't have access by ordinary beings. Those are exclusive to Arya beings. Those are the pure lands where Arya beings can be reborn through the force of that realization. So essentially what we're mainly talking about in terms of these concentrations is the 12 realms that ordinary and Arya beings can be born into. As well as, ordinary beings. Yes.
What does it mean, not big? One of those,
Oh, I'd have to go back to my,
or that, if it's
Oh.
too irrelevant.
not depressed, not big. I don't know that I don't have that information at my fingertips, but these are, again, the names they've given to these various realms of existence that are in the form realm. Again, they're pretty major accomplishments. Most beings all the ordinary beings, essentially, the only way that you take rebirth in the first 12, 1 through 12 there, is again through developing the respective concentration. Here it's called absorption. That's why these charts get kind of confusing because I'm using charts that other people develop. Usually we call those first four the concentrations, and then we call the last four the formless absorptions. But essentially, if you created the first concentration, this realm at the bottom here, that if you created the cause for that by developing this concentration in your life, then you could be reborn in one of these three realms: family of Brahma, entourage of Brahma, and great Brahma. And then the second one would be small light, limitless light, bright light. The third one is small bliss, limitless bliss, and so on. So essentially, you have different realms that you can take rebirth in on the basis of creating that karma. So that's what our text is essentially saying, is that you do have a karma that you create to actually take rebirth in those realms where you have kind of the same nature of that mind that you developed on the cushion and your concentration. That is the mind that you have in that realm of existence. The difference, of course, the four form realms do have form. They have a body. It's not as coarse as the body we have. And again, it doesn't experience any physical suffering. And in the formless realm, though, you don't have a body at all. You would have maybe some like slight wind energy that goes with the body, but nothing that we would call a body in terms of, our experience in this human existence. So he says, this is, however, meant in a broad sense that you would have these four types of birth on the basis of the four jhanas. More precisely, it should be understood that through meditations upon the lesser, medium, and greater stages of the third jhana, one attains birth among the Parita Subha, Apramana Subha, and Subha Kritsna deities. These would be, again, he was just using the third as an example. This would be, if we go back to that chart that I was just looking at, if I can move this stuff around, that would be, whoops, not this one, the one that I just had up there. That would be the beings of the small bliss, limitless bliss, and vast bliss. So it depends upon your individual practice of that as to which of the three within those you are reborn in, okay? That's all that it's saying, essentially, is that whether you do it as a lesser stage or a medium stage or a greater stage, that would dictate which of those three you go to. That's all I really want to say about the jhanas or concentrations, because it's, again, a very complex topic. Goes on to say, next is the manner of adopting virtue and rejecting evil through understanding several types of heavy karma. So this is the fifth topic in this section, and we're going to look at this idea that our karma has relative gravity, as it says there, becomes greater on the basis of certain factors. And we have, those of you who've taken Lam Rim courses know that there are presentations of this even in the Lam Rim. In the Lam Rim, we often see that there are 6 factors that increase the heaviness of karma. And so that's, I'm going to kind of try to correlate those to some degree. Here we're looking at 5 types of karma. And it's not identical, but they are included definitely in the 6. So I will come back around to talk about them after we've gone through this. But I'm just correlating that to those of you who studied the Lam Rim. You know that there is a presentation that is kind of similar to this, all right? Okay, so the 5 types of great virtuous and non-virtuous karma are: 1, those which are done constantly, meaning repetitively, continually. Secondly, those that are done with a strong inclination or intention, motivation. Third, those that are lacking a remedy, and that's meaning that we're not doing anything that would counteract them. Or then the fourth and the fifth are included in this last one, towards first the basis of assistance, those beings who have assisted us, or towards the basis of foremost virtue, those who have great qualities. So essentially this last one is talking about the basis for those beings that we're doing actions in regard to, whether we do virtue or non-virtue, because they've either assisted us as the basis of assistance, or they have great qualities due to their virtue. They become heavier objects for us. So it says there then in the final line of the verse, exert yourself hence in the performance of virtue, because we don't want to certainly commit virtue and non-virtue with any of these factors present, because that creates very heavy karma that we have to deal with. So in our commentary, Venerable Randawa says, karma, be it virtuous or non-virtuous, having any of the 5 conditions explained here, is said to be of great magnitude, because it is certain to yield results, and to do so in great number. So again, this is following on the jhanas, because to some degree, we want to create the most positive actions we can to feed into that, and also avoid the negative ones that can become obstacles to developing, these deeper states of concentration that are necessary to attain liberation, necessary to attain greater goals, as well as good rebirths. But okay, so the 5 conditions that were mentioned in that verse are included within the factors. This gets really confusing. 4 factors: preparation, intention, remedy, and basis. So again, these correlate a little better to the 6 that we talk about normally in our Lam Rim teachings, but again, I'll come back around to those. Let's look at how they're presented here by Venerable Rendawa. The factor of preparation, which means like the action that you are going to engage in, that refers to a particular act being performed constantly. Like if we make offerings every day, or if we do prostrations every day, or we recite a particular prayer every day, the constancy of those virtuous actions becomes very powerful. On the other hand, if we have attachment every day or anger at someone every day, that becomes more powerful because of the constancy with which we are engaging in those actions. The factor of intention refers to an act performed with a great willingness, whether prompted by mental afflictions or pure thoughts. It has to do with the strength of our mind causing us to do that action. The force of intention, whether it be our afflicted states of mind that leads to non-virtue or the pure thoughts that we have that lead to virtue. It's said that generally our actions become heavier when they are greater in terms of affliction or positive thinking, positive thoughts, virtue.
Is they're heavier than?
They become heavier in a sense. The actions become greater. It says at the top of the screen, it says there be of great magnitude.
Okay,
Oftentimes in the Lam Rim, we use the phrase heavier.
okay.
That actions have a weight to them, a
It's not a
gravity.
negative thing.
It just means that, yeah, I mean, it can be negative or positive depending upon the action, but in and of itself, it's not one or the other. It just means that it has greater weight to it, becomes heavier.
Mhm.
Or what was the phrase that said gravity, the relative gravity, the graveness, if you will, even. But that starts sounding negative. Again, this can be true for positive actions,
Mhm.
right? The remedy factor, which was the third, pertains to karma, which one is unable to counteract. It's actually said that, again, you can diminish the power of your actions by having a mind that immediately takes some regret in them. And that can happen for both positive or negative. Let's talk about the negative. If you have a mind that has just said something really horrible to somebody and you immediately go, I really shouldn't have said that. That's horrible. I'm so sorry I said that or whatever. We immediately go to a place of some form of regret as an antidote to that, or we purify that night with strong purification. That immediately cuts the power of that particular action. So if you have something that has the power cut to it, of course, it becomes less serious for us, but that force of that antidote becomes very powerful. Whereas we can have this with a virtuous state of mind. Say we just gave, some money to someone on the street, and then we realized that we gave them more than what we wanted to give or something. Somehow we pulled out a 10 and we only wanted to give them a 1 or something. And then we go, oh, I really regret that, right? We regret something positive. That also can weaken the force of the action that was virtuous that we were, engaging in. So if we have an action that has not been affected by an antidote, so here we're talking mainly about how we can affect it through an antidote, through some force that offsets it, then the action becomes heavier because it carries on. So if you don't regret your non-virtuous actions, guess what? They keep multiplying and increasing in their power, and they eventually cause unbelievable suffering. Whereas if you don't have something to counteract your virtue keeps growing in strength and so on. So the idea is that we want to make sure that we don't in any way weaken our virtue through minds that would be an antidote to that, as well as we want to be sure to weaken our negative actions by having the antidotes through our purification, our regret, and so on. That's the logic behind this one. And that is, again, one of the 6 factors that lead to heaviness. Maybe Jana, would you mind turning on the lights over here? It's starting to get a little dark where I'm looking down at. Thank you for doing that. So this next one, the factor of basis, is twofold. And that's where, again, on this presentation where there's 4 4 factors and 5 conditions, two of the conditions are within this fourth factor. Thank you so much for doing that. The factor of basis, as it says here on the screen, is twofold. The basis of assistance includes one's mother and father, preachers of the Dharma, and individuals providing assistance in specific instances, such as those found in the Jataka stories, the Jataka tales about the bear and the monkey, and so on. And none of the commentaries I looked at showed me anything to do with the bear and the monkey. But anyway, we do have many people that assist us, right? They are very powerful objects for us because they help us on our path and what we're doing and to have happiness and so on. Our parents are one of the strongest ones in that category. Though those who are instructors of the Dharma for us and so on become very heavy, but our gurus in that become part of the second category often. They would be, again, the heaviest in terms of a basis of assistance to us. But we also see them as a basis of foremost virtue, and that's described in that second paragraph. That includes the three jewels, the three ratnas. One who has just arisen from the cessation state of composure and the like, meaning beings who are in, having developed very high, abilities and qualities. Again, our gurus would probably fall into both of these categories and would be the strongest object by virtue of that because they assist us to the greatest degree. And they also have the highest level of virtue, seeing them as equivalent to the three jewels. Then it goes on to say the effects of any aid or injury to such persons constitutes karma of great magnitude due to the basis factor. Hence, one should avoid non-virtuous acts of great magnitude and exert oneself in performing virtuous ones. So this is the whole idea, is like when we talk about beings who are a strong basis for us, beings who have benefited us, or beings who have amazing qualities, these become very important in our lives. We can generate unbelievable positive merit by doing things in relation to them, by giving them offerings, following their advice, attending to their needs, whatever it is that is going on. But of course, we can create powerful negative karma in the same way, right? Because they're such powerful objects. I was talking the other night in a teaching about, how we have to be really careful. Well, actually, that was the other night with all of you. That was last week. Remember, we talked a little bit about that, about how we have to be careful with our parents because our parents are very powerful objects for us. And when we are tending to their needs, particularly at the end of life, trying not to create any negative karma there. We were mainly looking at it from the point of view of those 5 actions of immediate retribution. And yes, I think there are differences in terms of particular actions we take, not outright harm to them versus removing things that might support their life. But I think we have to be careful. Again, I'm just putting it out there as just general advice. I'm not going to say, this is good, this is bad, whatever. I think we just have to be careful with parents in particular, because they're complicated objects for us often, right? So we have to make sure we try to, tend to them as best as we can and use them as a powerful support for our practice of virtue and so on. So again, these 4 that were set out for preparation, again, the idea was an action that's performed more constantly or consistently. Then we had the intention, having a strong motivation. Then we had one with not having a remedy to it or an antidote to it. And then we had the basis. The 2 others that are set out in the Lam Rim include things having a different weight by nature. And that gets into, when I went through the 10 non-virtues way back at the beginning of this course, remember I talked about how of the first 3 that pertain to the body, by nature, killing is heavier than stealing. By nature, stealing is heavier than sexual misbehavior. By nature, those of body are more heavier than those 4 of speech. And that gets into just kind of how they are by nature. Now, other factors can complicate it because, there's always those potential for us to cause more harm through a particular action that might not be weightier than something else. But nonetheless, this is in general what we mean when we say heavy by nature. The 6th one that we left out in this explanation was they become heavier based on the type of deed that we do. So the example that's used there in terms of non-virtue is like if you were, this sounds really gross, so I'm sorry if I'm grossing anybody out. If you were to kill a being very slowly, like, through wounding it continually in order for its life force to be eventually, brought to death. This would be really a much more horrific deed and a heavier deed than if you were to kill something instantly through, like, the cattle prods in the head or whatever that, immediately kill the cow versus, wounding the cow and having its life be drawn out of it very slowly in that way. And that's the one that they use as an example. But I would say that we also have probably, again, different means of doing virtuous actions as well that might be more beneficial, as opposed to, other acts. But that's the one that's often set out in terms of the other six, when the six are set out as what makes karma heavy. So essentially, this is what we are looking at in regard to this section, is just to understand that our actions can become heavier, and we should make sure that we make our actions as heavy as possible when they're virtuous, but of course, avoid creating any non-virtue, or when we do non-virtue, make sure it doesn't become heavy as well. Then nonetheless, we do get some advice here, because some people may think, well, oh my gosh, I may not have done enough virtue, and I probably have done more non-virtue. And Rinpoche would tell us all that very often, we're creating non-virtue so much of our day. So the following verse, Venerable Randawa says, is stated to illustrate that one should not remain undaunted if one has performed many acts of non-virtue and only few of virtue. Whereas if the opposite is true, one need not have great fear. So again, we can see that there's a relative weight to these things, that we can still create a fair amount of virtue to overcome some of the non-virtue that we might have created. So the verse for that says, a few grains of salt can change the taste of a small quantity of water, though not that of the river Ganges, right? I mean, if you put just a few grains of salt in the river Ganges, it's not going to change the taste of it at all because of the volume of water. Whereas if it's just a small glass of water, you could have salty water right away, right? Understand that even small evil karma will do the same for light rudiments of virtue. So again, we can taint our virtue to some degree by engaging in evil karma. But if we create a proper amount of virtue, then the smaller non-virtues we do won't have as big an effect, because it'll be like the small grains of sand in the river Ganges. I'm sorry, grains of salt in the river Ganges. So there's just a short commentary on this one. Even as little as a few grains of salt will change the taste of a small quantity of water, causing it to become salty. It cannot, however, change the taste of a very large body of water like the Ganges River. One should understand that, similarly, even minor evil karma can yield results if one's rudiments of virtue are light. That is, if they're small and few in number. So if we aren't doing much virtue, then yes, even just small amounts of negative karma are going to be detrimental. But if these rudiments are large and numerous, the virtue we've created, it is unable to do so. Therefore, strive continuously for virtue of great force. So just kind of giving us the recommendation that even if we do find that we've got certain actions that we are struggling with, that we are having a hard time breaking our habit of, and what have you, recognize that they will be weaker by virtue of having a greater store of virtue that we are, engaging in. So don't get too obsessed about, I'm not perfect in my behavior. I can't, abandon all my non-virtuous actions yet. Well, join the club, we're all struggling. So just try to engage in more virtue, because it will have less of a prominent effect then. Makes sense, and it's kind of comforting to hear that, I think, anyway. So number 6 in this section is the 5 obstacles. Now, some of you may have heard of the 5 obstacles to developing calm abiding. This is not the same 5 obstacles. This is a different presentation of 5 obstacles that sometimes are presented in the context of concentration, but they also are obstacles to the attainment of any of our, greater realizations or what have you. So it says here, the following verse is stated to indicate that one should endeavor to eschew the 5 dharmas of excitement, etc., because they are obstacles to the attainment of the jhanas and liberation. So these 5 are set out two of them in pairs. So the first one is the pair of excitement and regret. Number two is malice or ill will. Number three is the pair of languor and sleep or dullness and sleep. Number four is sense desires. And number five is doubt. So recognize these five obstacles as thieves who steal the riches of virtue. So excitement and regret are set out first. Excitement is described as the state in which the mind is diverted to attractive objects. And this is how it is presented in the, when we talk about concentration, developing concentration, is that this is one of our major obstacles. Recall that, let me talk about these two for a moment, that we have kind of two forces when we're trying to meditate. And this is where these two come into play most obviously, though they do have an effect outside when we're not on our cushion. But when we're trying to focus the mind on a single object, we have the tendency for either the mind to not want to settle because it's constantly distracted outwards. Excitement is a form of that distraction, where we're dealing with attractive objects, where you sit down to meditate and all you can think about is that Ben and Jerry's that's in the fridge, that, in the freezer, that I just can't wait to dig into or whatever. So you have this thing, excitement that is looking at all these different pleasurable experiences and thinking how much more you would rather be doing that than sitting on the cushion, perhaps. The other tendency that we have is the way that the mind tends to, when we start drawing the mind in towards an object, an internal object to meditate on, that then the mind starts collapsing in on itself. It kind of withdraws too much. And that's kind of the dullness of the mind, the languor, and it tends to even move into sleep, right? Because sometimes we just can't even keep our eyes open when we sit down to meditate and we're nodding off, what have you. Those are the two main things that are obstacles to developing single-pointed concentration. Either the mind is, again, I think of it as being drawn out, or it's withdrawn in. And when you're kind of between those two, then you can rest in that state of just observing the breath or whatever object it is that you're meditating on. But those two forces are the main things we have to deal with. One keeps the mind from being stable, the excitement, and the other keeps the mind from being clear. That's the withdrawing that causes dullness and this heaviness of mind. So you need those two factors of stability and clarity for the mind to be in that place of meditation. So let's look at the rest of this passage on excitement. And again, regret is mentioned here. It says here, again, excitement, the state in which the mind is diverted to attractive objects, and regret, the remorse which arises at having done something wrong. You might think, why are these paired together? We'll get to that on the next page of this commentary. But these two are paired together here because they act in a similar way. And again, we'll see more of the rationale for why they're put together, but they cause the mind not to settle. Then we have malice. It's the deep feeling of animosity towards objects which one views with a hostile disposition. That one's pretty clear. That's obviously one of our most harmful states of mind because it leads to us potentially harming other beings. And then the third factor, again, obstacle, this is the pair of languor and sleep. Languor produces unfitness of body and mind through enervating the mind, through actually causing the mind to be blocked to achieving that kind of stability that we're looking for. Again, because of the heaviness of the mind. Languor is a weird word. We don't really see that so often. I think usually dullness is the word that's used here. It's that heaviness of mind. It produces an unfitness, again, through actually kind of reducing the sort of ability of the mind to stay engaged. Sleep is its companion. That causes the uncontrollable drawing in of the mind's attention. And then, of course, sleep can even ensue from that. But the factor of sleep is what causes the mind to get very cloudy, and we can't, the fogginess of the mind there doesn't allow us to stay on the object at all. So those two are put together, obviously, because they have that effect that's somewhat similar. And then again, we'll see the rest of the reasons why they're combined. And then the fourth one, sense desires, are the desire for sense objects, particularly food and sexual intercourse. Again, these are very powerful forces for us. I'd say there's more than food for some people, though perhaps many other objects, sense desires, what have you. The fifth one is doubt. This is the state of mind that is dualistic. It's divided in its attitude towards liberation and the path which leads to it. So it's unable to be kind of set on achieving something because it's still wavering. It's still in that place of not being one or the other. Either I am completely committed to it or I don't think it exists at all. Whatever, you're in that two-pointed state of mind. Again, so it's an afflicted form of doubt. Sometimes you might have doubt about teachings and then we examine them further and it helps us to clarify our doubts. But here it's a doubt that becomes an obstacle, especially with regard to developing concentration and the benefits of that. So these five are called obstacles, nivarana, because they obstruct one's attaining, again, the concentrations, liberation, and so forth, or because they obstruct one's practice of the three trainings. The three trainings, again, are morality, concentration, and wisdom. Okay, so excitement and regret are similar in that they both constitute an instability of the mind, right? The mind can't be stable because it's constantly wandering out to objects of attraction or to regrets we have from our past actions, what have you. Languor and sleep are alike in that they are both a dullness of mind. Again, they don't allow the clarity of mind to be there. Each pair is therefore classified as a single obstacle. Alternately, as stated in the Abhidharma Kosha, the obstacles occur in the desire realm because their opposition, sustenance, and action are the same. Two are combined into one. So that's why the explanation from the Abhidharma Kosha as to why excitement and regret are put together, as well as languor or dullness and sleep. And this is explaining that, what was just in that verse from the Abhidharma Kosha. The first pair, excitement and regret, are thus grouped as a single obstacle because one, they're both derived from similar causes, such as reflecting upon family, relatives, and so on. I mean, various things that we might be attached to or have some regret about. Two, they both cause the mind to become distracted, not to settle and become stable. And three, they are both overcome by shamatha, by meditative stabilization. The second pair, sleep and languor, are as well grouped as a single obstacle because one, they're both derived from similar causes. In this case, an excessive amount of food, for example, or other things that, a lack of rest, so that we then, when we sit down to meditate, the mind gets dull or even sleepy. Number two, they both cause the mind to become enervated, to become weakened. And in that way, that weakening of the mind doesn't allow it to maintain stable meditation. And three, they are both overcome by the ideation of luminosity, by light, by something that kind of brings the mind up from that darkness, dullness that happens. We're at the end of our time together tonight, and I didn't allow that much time for questions, but let's start with this next paragraph the next time. We're very close to the end of this, but nonetheless, I don't want to keep everyone here too late tonight. So any questions about anything I covered tonight? So we didn't make too far tonight, but nonetheless, we did get through a few of these more difficult sections. I was being asked over dinner whether I'm going to make it through the text or not. I think that was over dinner, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And I think so, but we are getting into some sections where we do have some shorter bits of commentary on verses, and those you can kind of work through a lot more quickly. Though obviously every now and then we hit a topic that requires just a bit more explanation. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we work through this, and I'll probably do again what all these other teachers of greater stature than I do when they get to the end of the text, just kind of go through the verses very quickly, and may not be able to do a fuller commentary then. But any questions again? Anything? Yeah, Mary Jo, please.
I have this thing in my mind, but I don't know if we have enough time, but it sounds a little silly, but I killed a spider the other day,
Mhm.
and it was a beautiful wolf spider, and I intended to put it in a can and take it outside,
Mhm.
but in scooping it, it was in my sink, And I have been relating to this for about 3 days
Hmm.
because he would go down in and then he would come out and I had the thing of trying to be there at the right time to
Right.
scoop it and take it outside. And I injured it
Yeah.
in that process of scooping it.
Uh-huh.
And it curled up and it died.
Yeah.
And I felt so very bad because it's kind of like I had a relationship with it and it was
Yeah.
a very beautiful spider.
Right.
And I, it's still one of those heavy things.
Mhm.
And I didn't think about doing a Vajrasattva
Mhm.
kind of a purification practice. But would that be helpful, do you think?
So I don't know if you heard all of what Mary Jo said online, but well, this often happens, right? When we have a spider or some insect that's gotten into our house, and we know that it's just going to be injured, and eventually, if with just the activity of being there or being living in the drain, as you said, in your kitchen drain, and so we try to rescue it, to take it outside and give it a home outside where it will live its natural life without the dangers of being caught up in human activity or pet activity, whatever the case might be. And when injury happens, and in this case, death of that being through a mistake we make while we were trying to rescue it, we have to go back again to those 4 components of a complete action. First of all, you did have the right basis there, but we aren't talking about an action of killing to begin with. We have to look at those 4 bases in regard to an action of non-killing, an action of actually saving that being from a place where it could be killed due to, the drain, all this stuff going on in our kitchen sink or whatever. So you were actually engaging in the positive action, and you had the basis of the spider. You had the mental state that included a correct discrimination of the spider, as well as a wish to free it from being in your kitchen and sink and what have you, to take it somewhere where it could be safe. And you didn't have any delusion present. You probably had compassion present in your mind, right? So the second branch is complete.
Anyway, yes.
Yeah. When we get to the third and we actually engage in the action, that's where you go and you've got your scoop or whatever it is that you figure might be the best way to get the spider out. And you engage in the action. So you're the one that would, if you had a successful salvation of the spider, you would have gotten the wonderful merit of protecting that spider, putting it outside, what have you. In this case, that didn't execute correctly, but you still had the mental component that was not about killing it. In other words, this was, accidental. With karma, there's no real accidents per se, if you talk about it from the side of the spider, but in terms of our own behavior, it was something that, yes, ideally it would be great if we could save the spiders without that happening, save the flies, those mosquitoes, whatever, without that occurring to them. But we're not perfect, right? We're going to make mistakes. And so the result, instead of the creature surviving and having its own life, not being killed, was in this case that the spider died. But you had the essence of the action is motivation. Again, this might teach you in the future to be more careful about how you execute the action and make sure the spider is saved. But I don't think there's really a huge negative karma going on there that you need to purify. And I think your regret that you feel immediately afterwards is strong enough to purify. Now, you can include it in your purification if you want. But in my estimation, and what Geshe Sopa says, not in this book that we're reading, but in his Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, when he talks about karma, he says that when you have regret immediately after doing an action, that already is a huge, huge purifying force. And in this case, you weren't even trying to kill it. I mean, if you were on the other side, killing the spider and then had regret, well, then you have already killed the spider. You've got all 4 of those complete. So you do have to do some purification there. That regret starts to move it in the right direction. But here you haven't even done a complete action, of killing at all. You didn't completely, assure it was going to be a virtuous action because you didn't actually save the spider in this case, protect it from death. But the death wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
and you regret at that moment. And that's what I feel whenever I do this as well, when I'm like trying to scoop some bug up or something, and I'm not as careful as what I should be, or the bug moves in the wrong way, then you're trying to get it and crush its little legs or wings or whatever.
Right.
It's horrible. It feels horrible. And the fact that it feels horrible is your purification in a sense.
Oh,
It's your sense of regret and remorse at having done this to this creature.
absolutely.
Even though you had those good intentions, in this case, yeah, wasn't able to execute properly, but you haven't really committed full negative karma. Again, purify it. It's no problem in including it in your purification. But in my estimation, based on what Geshe Sopa says, we've already done pretty major purification by having that mind.
Kind of through the regret.
Exactly. The regret is already very, very powerful.
And thank you,
Yeah.
that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at it in that
Yeah. Okay,
perspective.
good, good, good.
Thank you for taking this
All right.
time.
Any other questions or comments? So again, it is good to use those kind of 4 components to analyze what was going on. And first of all, I mean, and just to re-point out, with Mary Jo, she was engaging in a virtuous action. She was, going about trying to do what would be most beneficial, and stuff happens, right? That even happens when we're trying to help someone. Sometimes somebody's struggling with something, we go over and we have this good intention of wanting to benefit them, and they might, smack us and say, get the hell out of here. I don't need you bothering me,
Yeah,
Well, does that mean that we've committed non-virtue? It just means that, we weren't able to execute the full virtuous action that we wanted, but we had that initial starting point, the wanting to do good. And that's already amazing. Should be rejoicing in that aspect of it and taking note of how we might do things better in the future. Okay, let's conclude. Let's get on the screen the prayers, and Jana will kindly lead us in those again.
I'll read the list.
Oh, yes, please. She's going to read the prayer list. Let me take it off of this for a moment. Okay.
We'll dedicate the merit that was created by this teaching to those experiencing obstacles. Specifically, we dedicate for Stella, Bill, Patty, Alyssa, Laura, Haga or Hag A, Maggie A, Rob, Lucille J. For those experiencing illness, we dedicate for Stella, John, Bill, Patty, Jana, Dawn, Mary Jo, Thelma, Ben Anderson, Barnett, Raven Chacon, Rosemary P, Bill C, and Robin C. And we
Will
dedicate
you add Jane to that, please? Will you add Jane
Jane,
to the, yeah, thank you.
Illness.
Ill.
And then
Tate
Tate
Cat.
the cat for obstacles.
Tate,
And for illness, if you could add, her name is spelled like Janice, but with an S. It's Janice, Janise. Baldo is her last name. She's
for illness.
for illness. Yeah.
Any others? We dedicate for those who have died in the last 49 days, Ian Hobner, Mummy Max, Alice Frank, Virginia, Ellen, Winslow A, the spider, and the baby dog.
Okay.
And for illness, I would like to add Percyne, Percyne, and G or Gardner is her last name. Okay, thank you.
Any other names be added to the list? And perhaps there are others that we've offered to pray for or been asked to pray for who we've forgotten. We include those just by saying that. We kind of get a blanket covering of others in regard to dedicating for them. And let's go ahead and recite the prayers, and Jen will lead us in that. Whoops, get to the right prayers.
Due to the merits
So
of these virtuous actions,
may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
May the
Supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
For His Holiness Dalai Lama, the wish-granting,
wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And we'll do
and
this.
for Osohita Lama Yeshe's reincarnation.
Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request.
O
Lama, please, please
live long. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge,
and for Mother Living Beings,
you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. So we conclude tonight. Thank you all for being here. I might just mention this is coming up still over a week away, but on April 13th is the anniversary, a 1-year anniversary of Rinpoche's passing. So keep in mind that there are a number of prayers that we are recommended to do for that. The FPMT has encouraged us to do. And so you might start thinking about what you're doing with that day. That's like a week from this Saturday. So I know TNL is going to have some things going on, a Guru Puja in the middle of the day, like 1:30 to 3:30. I think that's happening, that you could join in. But it's very auspicious. There is a whole little booklet about practices that are good to do and the advice that's given around the anniversary of one's teacher passing. Those of you who feel a strong connection to Rinpoche in particular, but certainly all of us who are in his mandala one way or another. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there tonight. I'll sure I'll remember again next week, but okay. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Did you want to say something, Eloise?
No, just wanted to say thank you and good night.
Okay. Thank you all. Good night, everyone.